By the time someone reaches superhuman status, it's less about the physical being than it is about the ideas that the person represents. Although many of the people that I would consider superhuman in real life are now dead in the flesh, their ideas still exist, and that's what really makes them superhuman. Their ideas spread throughout society, they spread to people all around the globe, and they stand as examples to show how the people should live and what is righteous and what is vital. Although Hitler is dead, if he never existed, the world would have been much a different place, because we wouldn't have experienced the Holocaust. We wouldn't know the signs of somebody like Hitler coming into power. We wouldn't have known. There wouldn't have been the history that we have now. And it has shown us really the extremes of what it is to be an evil person, somebody who's really looking for world domination. So they really are important, and they show us how to behave in life. The answer is neither. Although many people have admitted that they have been inspired by comic book characters or just any fictional character in general, it's frequently not the person or the comic book character that inspires a superhuman. It is the situation. If nuclear weapons had not been invented, the Hulk wouldn't have existed. The Godzilla would never have existed. All of these atomic monsters or superhumans would have never existed at all. And it's the same thing with real life superhumans like Che. He was never inspired by a comic book character. It was his situation, it was the time period, it was the place in the world that he lived that inspired him to be a revolutionary rather than a lawyer or a doctor or any number of things. He decided that the right thing to do was to spend his life, saving oppressed people from corrupt governments. But that's because he lived in a place and a time that required that. And so it's not really about a specific character or a person that inspires the other. It's just like any monster. The superhuman comes from society itself and the situations that arise within society. The heroic archetype reflects the life of every superhuman, first of all. They all go through the heroic life cycle. They receive a call of duty, they cross the threshold, they have trials, they get helpers, they move, and then they eventually reach an apotheosis. It reflects the life of both real and fictional superheroes. And it's kind of, the only thing that's really kind of fuzzy is that when they actually become superhuman. It's during the crossing of the threshold that most of them become superhuman, because they leave the normalcy of society and they're no longer a normal person. And so it all, a lot of it depends on their call of duty. What are they actually going to accomplish? Because in many times, in order to complete their mission, they need to leave the social contract. And so there's usually a period of weighing the consequences of actually doing that. And if it's worth the result to be no longer part of the society, then they will cross the threshold. And I think that's a big part of becoming a superhuman, is leaving the social contract, because it is, it's what keeps us all within the realm. It's what polices the borders of our possible. And so it's, most of the time it's when the people cross the threshold that they become superhuman. But there are other times in which it's when they actually reach their apotheosis that they become superhuman. For example, Hitler. He did most of his trials as a normal person, and he was persuasive, but it wasn't until he reached his apotheosis, until he was the leader of Germany, that he was really considered superhuman, because at that point he was untouchable. He was immortal in a sense, and so before that he wasn't actually a superhuman, but it was when he reached his apotheosis. On the other hand, Che Guevara was a superhuman when he crossed the threshold. He was, he wasn't quite as revered at that time, but he decided that he was fed up, and so people, maybe not around the world, but at least in Cuba, were looking up to him. Before Cuba became liberated by him and Fidel Castro, it was before that he was like the infamous Che, and then after that he was, so much more. The only fuzzy part really is when they actually become superhuman, but there's no doubt that they do go through the heroic archetypal lifestyle in order to reach their superhuman status. Many would argue that Hitler was important because of what he did, and he was, but only to a certain extent. The killing of the Jews was huge, and it was obviously a very bad thing, but it's less about what Hitler did than what he represents, because he represents corruption and racism to the highest degree. He's taught us what can happen when a government has no regulation at all. Lenin wrote songs about peace and love, but he left his wife and his son to be with another woman. He broke the law numerous times, but he's still considered a great man, not because of his actions, but what he represented. He represented the ability of the average person to make a difference, the ability to stand up for himself. I mean, he represented the ability to challenge the establishment once in a while, and just to question social norms. Che Guevara killed dozens, if not hundreds, of people in cold blood. He overthrew a government and tried to overthrow two more, but it was what he represented, and he represented people who wouldn't stand up to be oppressed and treated badly. He represented the extremes of what a person might have had to do in order to be treated fairly. So, in short, the actions are not what makes a real person a superhuman. It's really the ideas behind them that make them really, truly remarkable, because they're just as human as anybody else, and so they make mistakes and they do stuff that may not be the right method of doing things, but the basic principles, the themes behind what they're doing is really what we should pay attention to. There are some real superhumans that have fatal flaws. Recklessness, greed, pride, just to name a few. But there are some of them that just don't seem to have these flaws. I mean, George Carlin didn't fall from grace throughout his whole life. He was on top of this game all the way through until he died. And so he didn't really have a flaw, he just had a really good gift. And on the other hand, Charles Manson did have a fatal flaw. He was way too reckless, not to mention crazy. So, I mean, some superhumans have fatal flaws and others just don't.